Heavenly Father, we come to you in this hour, asking for your guidance and protection to our virtual gathering today. We thank you for the gift of life, the gift of family, the gift of work, and the gift of friendship. We thank you for this great opportunity to bring us together in this session as brothers and sisters. Bless the committee, the facilitator, and the attendees of this gathering. May we continue to value and appreciate the true essence and meaning of life with the help of your grace. And as we go along to our discussion today, we humbly pray that you would deepen our understanding. Lord, enlighten us and give us wisdom every day. Forgive us for our shortcomings and remind us to always be mindful of the things we do in life. We offer our life and our decisions to you, O Lord. May this gathering today create a memorable experience and a fruitful outcome. We ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ, our Redeemer and our Savior. Amen.
Hello, everyone. A warm welcome to today's session hosted by the Dr. Mariano C. Lau Innovation Creation and Invention Laboratory. Here at the Dr. Mariano C. Lau Lab, we're passionate about promoting lifelong learning and innovation. Our Saturday seminars empower you with the latest knowledge and skills to thrive in our ever-evolving digital world. We're excited to dive into today's session with you. We have an engaging and informative program packed with insights and practical strategies you can apply in your professional and personal lives. Let's embrace this opportunity to learn, share, and grow together. Without further ado, let's meet our speaker for this afternoon.
Our speaker is a licensed professional teacher with 7 years of experience at Silliman University, where he serves as the faculty in charge of educational technology and development at the Dr. Mariano Lau Global Studies Center. Recognized for his contributions to the academic field, Jade was ranked 19th in the Silliman University Scientists Rankings for the year 2025. His expertise in educational technology and commitment to innovation continue to shape the learning experience at the university, enhancing both student engagement and institutional development through cutting-edge practices. Let us welcome Mr. Jade Montemayor.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Maayong hapon. So let me just share my screen. Cannot share screen. Okay, again, let me share this. Okay. There. Can you see my screen, Sir Fred? All right. So once again, good afternoon everyone. Maayong hapon and welcome to the first ever session for upskilling for lifelong learners for Dr. Mariano Silao Global Study Center. So basically, this will be the first session for this year, 2025. And our topic for this afternoon is about best practices for cyber hygiene, right? So we all know that the move of the university now is basically gearing towards digitalization, Internet of Things, with the advent of AI. So how can we make sure that we are safe or that we are secure in terms of our data within the cyber world, right? So let me just share, or let me proceed to our next slide. Okay, so this will be the objectives for today's talk or today's session. So first, we're going to understand key concepts in terms of cyber hygiene, and then we will be learning some practical tips to protect personal and professional data, and then develop habits for long-term digital well-being. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so before we start with actually talking about what is cyber hygiene, what are the concepts, what are the elements, what are the terms related to cyber hygiene, let me just show you some interesting report from Data Reportal. Okay, so Data Reportal is it's a well-known organization that provides in-depth reports and insights on digital trends, internet usage, social media, and mobile statistics, basically worldwide. So the data that I will be showing to you is just for the Philippines. Okay, so here it is. Okay, so this is as of last year, 2024. It says here that in the Philippines, we have around 86.98% million internet users in our country, right? So that's about 73.6% of the entire population. Okay. And then we also have around 86.75 million social media users. So if you look at the number, you have 86.98 internet users, you have 86.75% million social media users. So it looks like of all the internet users in the Philippines are also social media users, if you look at the numbers, right? So another one, it says here that there's 117.4 million cellular mobile connections. So it means that if you compare it to the population of the Philippines, it's around 99.3% has a cellular mobile connection. But then again, you have to take into considerations, like for example, um, these are not unique users. Like for example, one person may have two or three cellular mobile connections, right? So I just want to show you this just to make sure how ingrained, how embedded in the Filipino lives the in terms of internet, right? So we are heavily penetrated by internet. We are heavy consumers of internet content. Okay, so next. Okay, so the next slide, I will be showing some issues related to poor cyber hygiene. Okay, so this one. This one. Are you familiar with this Comelec data leak by hackers? They actually call this one Comileak, right? Because again, the data from the Comelec was leaked by the hackers. So this was 2016, at least 6 weeks away from national elections. So what happened was there were actually two groups, right? Two groups of hackers. So the first one, they call themselves Anonymous Philippines. So they hacked the website of Comelec. They did not get any data, but they hacked and defaced the website, right? So that's the first one. The second one, shortly after, an even more serious breach occurred when the second hacker actually they called themselves Luz Lek Filipino. So they hacked and then the database of around 70 million registered Filipino voters, they actually got a hold of it, right? So 70 million registered Filipino voters, they got the data for that. And then basically that includes your personal information such as names, your addresses, birth dates, fingerprints, and passport details. So those are the information that is being contained with that 70 million registered Filipino voters database. Okay, so during that time, This was actually considered as the biggest leak of personal data in Philippine history, right? So that's the biggest leak of personal data in Philippine history. That was data from the COMELEC. Okay, so another one, this one. So I'm pretty sure nowadays, PhilHealth, you've been hearing about PhilHealth, so probably it's in a different issue. So that could be a budget issue of some sort. But this one in 2023. So what happened? The Medusa ransomware group infiltrated PhilHealth's systems, so leading to a significant data breach. Again, the first one is data breach. This one also is data breach. So the attackers demand a ransom. This one is a ransomware, right? So the attackers demand a ransom of approximately 300,000 US dollars, or if you convert it into peso by that time, that would be 17 million pesos to decrypt the compromised files. Decrypt meaning because they got a hold of that data, they lock the data. So for you to access your old data, you need to have a key from the hackers. So for them, if you want us to give you the key, give us $300,000, right? So PhilHealth refused to pay the ransom. So it resulted to the hackers leaking the stolen data on on the dark web. Okay? So those are two of the most, I would say, biggest hacking incidents wherein the data are actually leaked in in the dark web, at least for the Philippine context. No, could it be prevented? For sure, it could have been. For this one, for PhilHealth, the underlying cause of this one was that the antivirus that they are using, they forgot to renew. They basically forgot to renew it. So this one happened on around September, and then the antivirus actually was expired already at around April. So they forgot to renew their antivirus, which basically leads to this significant loss of 17 million pesos. Okay, and that's just not. Those are not just isolated issues. We also have this one. This one is from the Union Bank, warning about phishing. This one, very common, GCash, right? You've been hearing GCash, seeing GCash posts from Facebooks about this particular scams in GCash. And then there's also a study from a data analytics company. So this is from a data analytics company named FICO, right? So they said that there's up to 5 million Filipino claims to be identity theft victims. So identity theft is that when someone is pretending to be you, right? So where did they get the information? Like for example, if they're pretending to be you, they should have an information about you, right? So where did they get that? Probably from, it's either this one, this could be a source, or this one could also be the source of that, right? So there's always a connection there. So this is in 2024. SWS, if you know SWS, it's Social Weather Stations. It's a social research institution in the Philippines. They conduct surveys, right? This one, they surveyed and they have respondents from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And what they find out was really staggering. It says here that overall, from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, they reported that there's 7.2% of the population actually are victims of cyber crimes. Right? When we talk about cyber crimes, these are crimes conducted or related to using computers, internet, or the likes. So again, 7.2% of the population has been a victim of cyber crime. Okay. So what does this mean? What does this implicate? So do you think this is just a coincidence that many of the Filipinos are victims of cyber crimes? Or probably because this has something to do with how we actually interact on the web, how we handle our data on the web. right? And basically, this is not just in the Philippines. If you look at this one, this is from Sophos. So Sophos is a cybersecurity expert. It's an organization. This is from America. Oh, this is from the United States, right? So according to them, of all the institutions, lower or higher institutions in the US, they say that 44% were hit by a ransomware. Again, a ransomware, we will explain it later, but just to make it, just to explain it in a simple way, a ransomware is like you get a hold of something, you ask something from it, like for example, you ask a money so that you can give it back to the owner. It's like kidnap for ransom, something like that. So again, it's institutions hit by a ransomware is around 44%, and the average ransom paid for those hackers is 2.73 million US dollars, right? And then, so there's a high chance 58% of the hackers succeeded in encrypting their data. So basically, 58% of those who were hacked, they actually succeeded in encrypting their data, meaning locking in their data so that the original owners cannot access it. And then 35% basically gave in to the demand of the attacker. So, like for example, if the attacker demands, give us $10 million so that you can have your old data back, then 35% of those being hacked were actually uh, they gave in to the attacker's demand. So that's how huge is is the problem of cybersecurity threats or cybersecurity, right? It's a global issue. It's not just in the Philippines, but it's a worldwide concern or it's a worldwide issue. So what causes those attacks, right? So we have this term, we have malwares or malicious wares, and this what actually causes ransomware, like for example, hackers to get a hold of your data. So there are different types of malwares, and later on we will be talking about the different types. And but this one, the type that we will be talking right here is are just the common types. So basically, we will be categorizing those malwares into six types. Okay. So the first one, and I'm pretty sure you are very much familiar with the term, is a virus, right? So computer virus, kumbaga. So as a definition from that research paper, it says that this particular malware, it attaches itself to a legitimate program or file and then replicate and spread when the program is executed. Okay. So to simplify what a computer virus is, it's like this. So think of it as a hitchhiker. So you know what a hitchhiker is, right? So imagine a virus like a hitchhiker. So a hitchhiker who needs a car. So the car could be a file, it could be a program. So what's an example of a program? It could be a game, like for example, any games that you can think of that you can download from the internet, right? So that's an example of what a program is. So a hitchhiker who needs a car, so we will replace car with like it's a file or it's a program to travel. So basically this particular hitchhiker cannot travel without without the car. So then it attaches itself to that particular program or file, and when you open that file, the virus spreads and it wreaks havoc on your computer system. So it's like that. It attaches itself to a file or a program, and then once you activate the file, once you open the file or you execute or you run the program, the virus will also spread and executes. Okay, so like for example, again, you download the game, but hidden inside is a virus that infects your computer. Sige. Let me look at the chat box if you have questions. By the way, so we're talking about computer virus, and one of the most infamous computer virus was actually created here in the Philippines, right? So anyone who can share to us, what do you think is one of the most destructive virus that was created here in the Philippines? It's a really common word.
Love
Sige, if you
virus.
can, I'm sorry, ma'am.
This is the love virus.
Yeah, it's
Were they
at
still
it's the I love you
oh my
virus.
god. Yeah, the
Yes,
love virus.
yes. So the I love you virus, it was actually created by someone from the Philippines. It's Anel D. Guzman, right? And in totality, the damages globally that was caused by that virus was around an estimate of around 10 billion US dollars by that time. So it's one of the most destructive computer virus that was basically created by mankind, right? And I'm not sure if we should be proud of it, but it's created here in the Philippines. Okay. Yeah. Now, second one, it's more or less similar, but they're totally different with computer virus. Is we also have this one, worms. So we now have viruses, we now have worms, but again, these are all computer virus and computer worms. So for worms, they as what is being described from that paper is a self-replicating malware that do not require user interaction to spread. So unlike virus, that um, it needs a file. Kumbaga, a virus needs in real world, a virus needs a host, right? Just like with computer virus, it also needs a host. But for the worm, they can self-replicate without the interaction of us, of human beings. So a worm is like a sneaky intruder, like who enters your house. Think of it as this way. So it's an intruder who enters your house through an open window. So an open window, think of it like, for example, you have your network or you have your USB, you have your flash drive, right? It could be there. Sige. So later on, Sir Fredly is going to list down. If you have questions, just feel free to write it on the chat box, and then later on, Sir Fredly will list down those questions and we'll answer them later once we're done with the discussion. Right? Okay. So thank you so much, Doc Gino, for your question. So again, a worm, an intruder who enters your house. So it's spread by itself without human intervention, jumping from one computer to another without needing a file. So if the virus needs a file to self-replicate and, make distractions to any of your devices, a worm doesn't need a file. It can self-replicate and then it can spread from one PC to the other or from one device to the other. Right? So an example of this is a worm can spread through the company's Wi-Fi or company's LAN or the physical local area network of the company. Okay, so that's the main difference in terms of viruses and worms. Then we also have, yeah, okay. We also have the third one, this one, really common. So one of according to that study from Sophos, so the education sector was the mostly hit by ransomware for the year 2020. So ransomware encrypts the victim's file and demands a ransom in exchange for this decryption key. Okay. So to simplify it, it's look like this. Ransomware is like a digital kidnapper. So we all know about the term kidnapper, right? So think of ransomware as a digital kidnapper. So imagine a kidnapper, it locks up your files and then it demands ransom to give them back. Go. So ransomware encrypts your files and then they ask for money, right, to unlock them. So it's your file. When they got a hold of it, they will lock it, encrypt. That's the term. That's a technical term, encryption. They're gonna encrypt it, and then they will ask money from you so that they can decrypt the file and give it back to you. Or if you will not give into their demands, they could leak your file. So leak your file, it could be in the dark web or it could be somewhere else, right? So an example of this is you open an email attachment. And suddenly, all your photos and documents are locked with a ransom note demanding, for an instance, 10,000 pesos. So you receive this email, and then on the email, there's an attachment. Unknowingly, that's a ransomware. So when you open the attachment, suddenly your PC lock up, and then you have a note that says, give us this certain amount or else you cannot access your laptop. So if you have, for example, if you have really important files or whatever it is inside your device, then probably you would give in to their demands. Right? That's another form of malware. So the fourth one is a Trojan horse. So much like the known Trojan horse in history, so it's almost similar lang. So Trojan horse disguises themselves as legitimate software to basically trick users into installing them. So think of, 'di ba, for the ransomware, we think of it as a digital kidnapper. For the Trojan horse, think of it as a fake friend, right? So like the legendary Trojan horse from the Greek mythology, right? So it looks safe, but secretly carries malware inside. So as a Trojan horse disguises itself as a normal application or normal file, but actually installs some malware on your device. Right? You would never know this particular device or this particular application or this particular file has malware inside because by just looking at it, by using it, you would s- you might probably say that this looks safe, this looks fine to use, but you'll never know that it has something inside it. So basically, one good example of this is when you download a free game, but in the background, it steals or it's stealing your passwords and all the other information in your device. So that's a Trojan horse. Okay. And then another one, we also have this. Okay, this one, the spyware. Okay. So if the Trojan horse is a fake friend, the spyware is the what we called online stalker, right? So as defined, it is designed to covertly monitor the user's activities, collecting sensitive information, right? So they actually have this term. It's called key lagging. So basically, if a spyware is running on your device, it could be that they are collecting information on the keys that you are pressing. So they have this record as to what keys are you pressing in your keyboard. So it's called key lagging or keystrokes, right? So again, it's an online stalker if you simplify it. So imagine you are someone is secretly watching everything you do on your device, right? So spyware, it tracks your keystrokes, that's what I've said, via key logging. It tracks your browsing habits and personal information without your knowledge. So one good example for spyware is a hidden spyware program records your passwords and then basically sends them to a certain website or probably sends them to a hacker. So that's what a spyware is. You will never know that it's on your device unless it's too late. But later on, you will see that you will know that there are actually things that you can do to counter or to avoid these malwares. So the last one, again, these are just the most common types of malwares. Right now. Okay, so and the last one is adware. So adware is a form of malware that automatically delivers unwanted advertisement, often bundled with free software. So yes, you got a free software, be happy with that. But bundled with that free softwares are actually adwares, right? So think of adware as a salesperson, an annoying salesperson. So it's like a pushy salesperson who basically won't leave you alone. No? It will floods you with ads on your screen, basically unwanted ads. So, well, most of the adwares, they will just flood you with advertisements on your screen. So basically annoys you with those ads. But others also, other adwares can actually install another or more malware in your device. So they're not just pop-ups of advertisement, but they could be installing another malware. Probably they could be installing another spyware, or they could be installing another adware within the device that you are using. So if you're seeing a lot of pop-ups, particularly pop-ups that advertises something, so there's a high chance that your device might be experiencing or might be infected with an adware, right? So these are some of the common malwares, types of malwares nowadays. Okay? Sige. Okay, so far we've discussed about malwares, and malwares, these are so that they can infect you, they have to attack your device, right? So it's more on the context of your device. So the virus needs a device. The worms, it needs to have a network, a device, as well as ransomware, Trojan horse, spyware, and adware. So these are all security threats to the device that you are using. What about you as a human being? Can you also be um, infected by this malware? So certainly not, no, because this only infects your devices. So for us, we can be scammed. We can be tricked into doing something with this scams. So I will be showing you, this is from Reader's Digest, right? So 10 of the most common Facebook scams. If you go back to the previous number that I showed you on, about the numbers of internet users in the Philippines, it's around 88 million. And then the numbers of social media users in the Philippines is also around 88 million. So Facebook scams. And the number one social media platform in the Philippines nowadays for the past few years, it's still Facebook. So since most of us uses Facebook, there's a lot of scams going on in Facebook, right? So what are the common Facebook scams? So these are from, again, this is from Reader's Digest. So it says here that there are 10. We have clickbait scams, we have fake fundraisers, giveaway scams, quiz scams, cloned accounts, and up to the romance scams. So later on, we'll be discussing these scams one by one, and let's start with this one. Clickbait. Have you heard the term clickbait? Say probably yes, no, because this is a really common term, a clickbait. Let me just look at the chat box. Okay. So a clickbait are designed to grab your attention. Again, these posts, these videos, these screenshots or images, these are designed to grab your attention and lure you into clicking on misleading links. So we have here an example, like for example here, this post, it says here that dermatologists hate her because she is 51, but she looks 25. So for example, if you're looking for ways to, look younger, you would be enticed to click this particular link, right? So that could be a clickbait. Okay. So the associated links could potentially put malware on your computer or require personal information to claim a prize. So like for example, if you click on this one, it could redirect to a different link, and that link, maybe it could download a malware in your PC. And with that malware, it could collect information from your PC, get some data from your PC, or as what it says, it would require personal. For example, this would lead to a website where it says you have this particular price, and then you need to input this information so that you can claim a prize. So those are clickbaits. Again, the main purpose of this one is that these are really designed to grab attention. And then once you have your attention is captured, then if you click on this one, then it could lead you to a different link that could probably harm your computer or your PC. So clickbait. So really, this is very common. So also, I think I have experienced this one. There are also posts where you can actually this like pictures of like it's a certain news, but when you click on that one, it would lead you to an e-commerce platform. It could lead you to a link to Shopee product or a Lazada product or other e-commerce platform products, right? So again, those are clickbaits. So next is this one. Fake fundraiser, which is really common in the Philippines. So scammers will often exploit sad stories like heartbreaking diagnosis or life-threatening disease for their own benefit. So take a look at this picture from Verifiles. Um, there's a child. I think this child is in an ICU or something, and then there's a post. So basically, they have verified that this particular post is a fake one, right? They are using a heartbreaking story to their own advantage. So basically, they will be posting this one, and this is really common, no? I think siguro most of us have experienced this one. If you're a Facebook user, probably you have experienced this one. There are these posts of really heartbreaking, like people who are really sick or they have these diseases, and then they're posting this one, and then they're asking for help, and then they have this Gcash number, and so on and so forth. So we'll never know if those are real or if those posts are true. But the rule of the thumb is if you don't know the person, then just never mind it. Okay? Because you'll never know the person who posted the Gcash number related to the post might be of that from a scammer, right? So really common in the Philippines, fake fundraiser. So they may send messages or create posts in Facebook pretending to be people with diagnosed, for example, with cancer or recovering from an accident, for instance, and probably asking for help in terms of medical bills and other stuff, right? So things like those, this is a scam. This is actually a way of tricking you to send money. Another one is this one, also really common, giveaway scams, right? So fraudsters create fake giveaway to fool users into sharing personal information. Like for example, in an instance, credit cards, or if we're not into credit cards, if you will click that one, it could download a malware or in that example, a virus in your phone or your computer. So like for example, this posts, it says, we are still giving out $300 to the first 100 people to comment cash, and it starts now, right? So this could be a fraud, right? So there. This is really common now in Facebook. So you will be commenting cash. So what they're getting from this one is like, for example, reactions of their posts. Okay, another one, we also have quiz scams. I remember there was a time when this is really common, but nowadays I don't see much now in terms of this applications about there's like a quiz and they actually boast their score, and you can also try that. They will give you links, right? So this one, this is a post this is a news from an Australian website, 9news.com.au. And then the post says something like this. Do you remember your first grade teacher's name? So basically, it captures the attention of the reader, and then some of them actually type the name of their first grade teacher. But you'll never know on Google, if you forget your password, there might be some questions to answer prior to basically getting back or making a new one, right? And one of that is the name of your first grade one, or your teacher's name, first grade teacher, right? So Hackers can use that. Hackers can use that information so that they would try to access your account using your email, and then they just forget password and probably try to use the information that you type from this post to basically gain the password of your account. So quiz scams. And then what else? Cloned accounts. This one. Scammers will clone a person's entire Facebook profile, creating a fake profile of a real person. So from there, they can search the original user's friend list and send their contacts a link. For example, this one, it's a get rich quick scheme or probably a link to download the malware. Have you experienced this one? So you have these friends, right? And then all of a sudden there's someone bearing the same name, bearing the same photo of that friend. You got an invite from that account, or probably some of your friends are posting, beware of this account. This is a fake account. This is a cloned account. It's also really common in Facebook nowadays. Person cloning an entire Facebook account, sending friend requests to the original account, to the friends of that original account. And after that, once they are friend, for an instance, then they can then, they can then, for example, send a message asking for help on a certain situation, probably asking for money, right? So I have a friend before, so the the account was that of his uncle, right? So that friend did not know that that was a clone account, and then the account basically asked for help. He almost he's really about to send money, but then upon verifying, it was just a cloned account. So we should be aware of this kind of scams, right? So always verify, verify. And then this one, spam messages. So like for example, in this image, we have the message says that need to confirm that this page belongs to you and is being used normally. So to confirm, click that link, and after 24 hours of not receiving a response, we will temporarily lock this page. So if just try to dissect the message, it sends urgency that you have to click this or else your account will be locked within 24 hours. So that alone is a red flag. If it's a message that sends urgency that your account will be deactivated, or your bank account or your Facebook account, it could be any account, and the message is very urgent that you have to do it now or else this account will be locked or will be suspended in some sort, then that's actually a red flag. And mind you, this is not just sent to you, it's actually sent to many people. So spamming, they're spamming this people from the friends list. So that's one of the common Facebook scams. And then the second to the last is malware attack. So they can also have malware attack on Facebook by just basically sending a link, right? So we all know that we could trick someone into clicking on a link, and by just clicking that link, it could go to a website or it could download a file on your device, which could basically infect your device. So like this one, it's just a post, and then what we have here, if you look at the link, it looks like a typical, normal link. But if you notice, it says here HTTP. So one red flag in terms of looking at the security of a website is that when a website starts with HTTP, then you have to be aware that that website might not be secure, because the secure websites actually it always starts with HTTPS, right? So this one, they have a link here and starts with HTTP, and then when you click on that one, it could, you know, it could lead lead you to a website, and or it could download something on your device, and then your device might be infected by a malware, right? And this is the last one for common Facebook scams is romance scams, right? So like for example, we have this message here. This is from helpcloud.com. This is a blog. It says here that hello, I always enjoy watching what you've shared. So basically all the things that, a normal person would do. I'll be glad if you can just click into my profile and send me a friend request so we can talk more in Messenger. So But if you find this message embarrassing, please pardon my manner. So if, for example, if you are someone who can easily who will be easily enticed by this kind of messages, then you might click the profile, you might message the person, and you could be scammed by this simple message, right? Romance scam also really common in the Philippines. Okay, so you have to think twice before accepting friend requests, especially from people that you don't know. It could be the first step to falling for a romance scam. Okay, so those are some of Facebook scams that are uh, that are really common here in our country. Now that we know, so again, going back, no, there's a lot of security threats. There's a lot of tricking in an online world, right? So given that we are Filipinos, given that we heavily consume internet contents, how can we make sure that we are safe online, right? So the data don't lie. Filipinos, most of us, 73.3% of the Filipinos actually uses internet. So that's more than the majority. So how can we stay safe online given our given a significant chunk of the population is heavy users of internet, right? So we have this cyber hygiene concept. This is not a new concept. This is cyber hygiene, I think, has been around since 2012. So when we talk about cyber hygiene, yeah, let me go back there. There. So it's just cyber, when you talk about cyber, anything relating to computers or information technology or virtual reality, and then hygiene, so practices, to maintain health through cleanliness, for an instance. So combining the two, it's defined by a research by Manel that it refers to or is a set of practices aiming to protect from negative impact to the assets from cybersecurity related risk. What are the cybersecurity related risk? Those malwares or the scams, right? So it's a set of practices. A second definition from INESA, it says here that it's a personal hygiene involving simple daily routines, practices, and regular checkups in the efforts of maintaining good online health condition, right? It should be a simple routine. So 'di ba, for example, in our daily personal hygiene, right? So brushing your teeth before sleeping or after sleeping, washing your hands before eating, those are just simple routines and they become habit and they become part of us, right? So this is the real purpose of what a cyber hygiene is. It should be a simple one, so simple that you can just make it part of your daily life. Like for example, um, again, cyber hygiene is it's equals to digital self-care, right? So simple routines that you can do, practices, simple practices that you can do to maintain good online health condition. It should not be complicated. It should be simple lang. So that we can do this, we can make this part of our daily lives, we can make a habit out of this practice, right? So according to this one, well, yeah, there. So that's what cyber hygiene is. Okay, that's the definition of what a cyber hygiene is. So before we proceed um, with listing down what are the best practices for cyber hygiene, I just want you to answer a really quick survey. This is an anonymous survey. There's no need to um, add your names or your emails. Just go ahead and answer the survey. Let me just copy this one for a while. Let me stop sharing. Okay, and then let me copy the link. There, if you can answer this survey, there. So that's the survey. It's a Google form survey. Probably it would take you around 2 to 3 minutes to answer. So if you can answer it now, so that we can proceed with what are the best practices for cyber hygiene. Sige. So I already sent the link in your chat box if you can check your chat box. So I'll give you siguro mga 3 to 5 minutes to answer the survey. So for those of you who can't access that bit.ly link, uh, you can also have this direct link to the survey. Let me check. There. There. All right. Sorry. So I think we can continue now. Let me share my screen again. There. So yeah. So earlier we were talking about digital hygiene. We defined what this digital hygiene is. We know that these are just simple routines to make sure that you are safe online, right? Okay. So what are the best practices, a basic cyber hygiene best practices? So This EU agency, INESA, is an agency that focuses on improving cybersecurity across Europe, right? So they provide guidance, conduct research, and helps EU member states strengthen their cybersecurity frameworks through policies, best practices, and incident response coordination. And this list is coming from them. So according to INESA, these are the basic cyber hygiene best practices. Okay, so we have 10. First one is use strong passwords. Okay, again, the first one for basic cyber hygiene best practice is you have to use a strong password. Who is guilty of this one? For password, create a strong and unique passwords that are hard to guess. They recommended use a mix of letters, numbers, and special characters, right? So you have always have to create a strong and unique passwords that are hard to guess. So in my personal experience, I always have a mix of again numbers, even um, caps lock, lowercase, or I mean lowercase or uppercase, the cases of the letter. I also have those numbers and then special characters. That's the first one in terms of password. The second one is you always have to avoid using the same password for multiple accounts. And well, actually, I'm guilty of this one, right? So sometimes we try to compromise because it's really hard to remember, multiple passwords for multiple accounts. Like, for example, you have accounts for Instagram, Facebook, and all the other online platforms. Why not just use one password for all of this? Well, that's a red flag, right? So they suggested that do not use the same password for multiple accounts. If you have so many platforms, if you are into so many platforms, then probably I would suggest that you can use at least a mix of up to five passwords, right? You have this list of five passwords, five hard to guess passwords that you can use for all of those accounts. But then again, you have to do not use the same password for multiple accounts. And then the third one is if have a password manager. So phones nowadays, if you are using iPhones or if you are using Androids, it has a built-in password manager, right? Or if it doesn't have, you can download it from the Play Store or from the Google or from the App Store in iOS. So there's actually a ton of reliable password manager. This app basically stores your passwords, and if you want, it could generate a strong password for you. So you may want to use a password manager so that if you really want to have a specific password for a specific account, then you can use that application. And then also check if any of your accounts appear in existing data breaches and change your passwords for the services identified. Like for example, upon starting this talk, we learned that there has been data breaches in Comelec or in PhilHealth. So if you think that, uh, because you can actually email, you can ask them if your information is part of the data that has been leaked, right? So if you think or if you suspect that your data could be part of that data breach, then what you can do is just change your password. So change your password regularly and avoid using the same password for multiple accounts, and then you always have to use a strong password. At the end of the day, use strong passwords. Okay? Password. The second one is you have to enable two-factor authentication. So one good example for two-factor authentication is our SU email account, right? So for the SU email account, they need to have a phone number. Your account should be linked to a phone number because for an instance, this is your first time to log into this particular device. Upon recognizing that this is your first time logging into this device, Google will actually send a one-time PIN, an OTP to a phone number so that to basically verify if that is really you who is trying to log into that particular device. So if that's you, then of course you have the phone, you have the number, then you can receive it and then you type the OTP on that, for example, that laptop, right? So that's what two-factor authentication is. So instead of just having the password, there's another layer of security, another layer of authentication where it sends an OTP. It could be to a specific number or to a specific email, and then you can use that OTP to verify that it's really you who's trying to log into a device. So that's what a two-factor authentication. I think most, if not all, of the new applications now, they actually rely on two-factor authentication for security. So for SU email, this is a default that all of the accounts are two-factor 2FA enabled. Okay. So next, even with Facebook, it's also two-factor enabled. If your Facebook account is not yet two-factor enabled, then there are a lot of tutorials that would help you so that your Facebook or any other platforms, if they allow two-factor authentication, so that it will be more secure, right? Next is this one, regular software updates. So keep your operating system, applications, and antivirus software up to date, right? So enable automatic updates where possible to ensure you have the latest security patches. So by the way, why do we have to update regularly our software? Or in this case, why do we have to update, for an instance, our phones, right? Why do we have to update our PCs? Why do we have to update our laptop? So on the release of a certain, let's just say, operating system, you have your phone or you have your computer or your PC. So on the release, after the release of that certain operating system, software developers might discover vulnerabilities or weak points in their programs, right? So that's why there's an update to actually fix that weak point or fix that vulnerability. That's the purpose of the software update. You might wonder, unsa man ni, sige na lang og update. Yes, because probably they're seeing a lot of weak points and they're trying to work on so that those weak points will be fixed, right? So that's what the purpose of an update is. So security, that's what we call security fixes. It fixes some of the vulnerabilities in the current system, right? So also when you update your system, you ensure that you have the latest anti-malware. So like for example, with users of Windows PC, you have this anti-malware software built in or embedded within the system, right? So it keeps on updating because then again, there's a lot of malwares being produced every day. Okay, so next. Again, remember this. Software updates, the main purpose is that because on the release of the software, the developers discovered a vulnerability, a weak point, and they're trying to fix that. That's why there's an update. So be cautious with emails and links. So avoid clicking on links or downloading attachments from unknown or suspicious emails. This is the rule of thumb. If you don't know the person, if you don't know where the email is coming from, if you think that the sender is a suspicious one, don't open the email, not even a link or the attachment connected to that email. So if you think that this is an important one, you can verify the sender by you can verify the sender's identity before responding to that particular email, right? And then always you have to take time to reflect on a request for your personal information and whether the request is appropriate. Don't just for example, someone is asking for personal information, just give it away. Always take time to reflect, why is this person asking this kinds of information? And if you think the request is inappropriate, then don't respond to it. But if you think that's appropriate, then you do uh, the right thing to do. Okay? So be cautious with emails and links. Another one is you have to back up your important data. So what are this data? We have a lot of data. We have files, we have images, we have videos, we have programs if you are into coding. So you have to make sure that you regularly back up your important files to an external drive or cloud storage. Are you familiar with the 3-2-1 rule in terms of backing up, right? So just keep 3 copies of your important files, right? The original copy of that file, probably on that device, a backup copy on cloud. So if you are using Google Drive, that's fine. That's a backup copy on the cloud, and another one, a copy on an an offline copy. It could be on a flash drive, it could be of a hard drive, right? So 1 copy on the device, 1 copy on the hard drive, then 1 copy in the cloud, just in case. So that's the 3-2-1 rule. If that file is really important. And then occasionally you may want to restore one of those backup just to make sure that they're working. So just remember, backup important data, 3-2-1 rules. Okay? Then you have to secure your Wi-Fi network. So open Wi-Fi networks with weak passwords are easy targets for hackers. And really, if you can just watch the video, I think I forgot the link. It's really easy to get a hold of a Wi-Fi network, control the Wi-Fi network, right? So if someone connects to your network without permission, then they can potentially access your personal data or monitor your online activity. So you have to make sure you have to secure your Wi-Fi network, right? So you have to use strong encryption for your Wi-Fi network. So when you have a Wi-Fi connection, you can actually connect to the main dashboard of the Wi-Fi, and then you can choose which connection or which encryption do you want to use. So if you have WPA3, this is the latest one, then you can use that. Or if you know, as long as do not make your Wi-Fi, especially your own personal Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi in your house, open to public, because this is really risky and it could lead to potential hacking of your Wi-Fi network, right? So also when someone uses your Wi-Fi without permission, like for instance, your neighbor, they're using your Wi-Fi without permission, they could be using your internet bandwidth, right? Slowing down your connectivity and causing disruptions in your online activities. So like for example, you're into watching a movie, 4K movie, and then you don't know that all the neighbors, all the neighborhood in your area are using your Wi-Fi connection, then there might be disruptions in your movie, especially if you're watching a high resolution 4K movie, right? So that's it. Always secure your Wi-Fi network. And then you have to use antivirus or anti-malware software, right? So antivirus software actually scans your device for known signatures of malware. So comparing files to a database of known threats. So basically what an antivirus is, it has a list of all the known virus signatures, right? And it will scan your device. And then once it detected something that could match, that could be a possible match to one of the list of virus signatures in the database, then it would remove it or it would quarantine that particular virus. It's also very important that you have to update your antivirus because according to McAfee, you know McAfee or Kaspersky, these are cybersecurity companies. According to them, there's an around rough estimate of around 350,000 new pieces of malware created daily, right? So that's why it's really important that you have to update your antivirus so that the list in the database of your antivirus will be updated as well. Because, for instance, right, there's this virus, and then you have an antivirus, but your antivirus, it may not be able to recognize a new one because it's not on its system. So that could be a possibility. That's why we have to update our antivirus. And then educate yourself and others, right? So basic one, stay informed about the latest cybersecurity threats and trends. So you attend something like this, participate in cybersecurity training and awareness programs. And if you have knowledge, please share it with your family, with your friends and colleagues to promote good cyber hygiene. So don't just keep it with yourself. With all this knowledge about cyber hygiene, share it with your family and friends and even colleagues, right? And then this one, you also have to limit your personal information sharing. Okay, so be mindful, always be mindful of the personal information you share online, right? So you always read the privacy settings or the privacy um, settings on your social media and other online services. So that's very crucial, right? So that you will know how these platforms, like for instance, Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, how they use your information if you are using that particular platform. So you always have to read privacy settings. Again, the main reason for this here is you have to limit your personal sharing online because you don't want people to know too much about you because that could be used against you. That could be used for possible identity theft, right? So they have this so much information from you, personal information, then they could create someone that could act as you with all the information provided online. Okay? And then the last one is you monitor accounts and devices. Okay? You regularly check your financial accounts and online profiles if, for instance, you think that there's a suspicious activity. You also have to use security software to monitor your devices for unauthorized access. So good with Gmail, or let's keep it into context, SU email. If they think that you're trying to log in from an unknown device, probably this device you haven't used this before, they actually will send an email to you, right? That your this account uh, is being accessed by this particular computer in a particular location. So always you monitor your accounts. You can actually monitor which accounts is your Google, for example, your SU email is logged in. So if it's logged in into multiple devices, you can check that. And if you think that one of the devices listed is not yours, then you can actually remove that from the devices allowed to use your SU email or your Gmail for that matter. Okay, so those are the 10 cyber hygiene best practices according to INESA. So again, just to recap, you always have to use strong passwords. You enable, if not by default, you have to enable two-factor authentication or 2FA. You update your software. Don't be afraid. Yes, it could take time, but it's really important that you have to update your software. Be cautious with email and links. Back up important data. You have to secure your Wi-Fi. You have to use antivirus and anti-malware software. Then you have to educate yourself as well as educate others. You limit your personal information sharing and always you monitor your accounts and your devices, right? So that's not the last part of this session. So the last part is this one. So far, what we've talked about is about the security threats that you can get out of your devices, right? So this time, that's the technical part. This time we'll be dealing about the well-being of a person in relation to cyber hygiene, right? So this time, let's talk about the screen time. Okay. So before we go down and talking about what are the effects, it could be a positive effect, it could be a negative effect of prolonged screen time. Let me just show you this. Let me just show you these numbers. So, how much screen time is too much for adults? Well, in the Philippines, as of 2024 October, in terms of daily time spent using the internet, an average Filipino uses around 9 hours and 9 minutes daily in the internet, right? Is that too much? Later we'll find out. In terms of mobile phones to access the internet, out of 100%, of course, 98.6% uses their mobile phones to access the internet. So a group, oh, no, I mean, almost 100%, almost all of the internet users are also using their mobile phones to access the internet, right? And this one, in terms of time spent on your mobile phone using the internet, it's actually on average around 5 hours and 30 minutes. So if you look at the worldwide average, we're really far from it, right? The worldwide average is around 3 hours and 45 minutes. In the Philippines last year, as of October, it's around 5 hours and 30 minutes. An average Filipino internet users uses his or her mobile phone to access the internet for that much time. Okay? So is that too much? Then what do you think is the recommended screen time for adults? Sige, if you can type on your chat box, what do you think is the recommended screen time for adults? 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, four, five? What do you think is the recommended screen time for adults? Okay, let me see the chat box. 5 hours, okay. Thank you, ma'am. 3 hours, three, 2, 2 hours, four, four. Sige. So looking at the answers, there's been a variety of answers. No, we have, you know, we have one, we have five, we have three, we have four. We even have a range here, 2 to 4. So what is really the recommended screen time for adults? I will be showing you of some studies from known universities globally dealing to or pertaining to the recommended screen time for adults, right? So this one, saan naman eh? Oh, this one. This is from Stanford, right? So it says here, they have this particular article, and it says here that excessive screen time defined as more than 2 hours a day. So according to this particular article from Stanford Lifestyle Medicine, it says here that yes, it's anything that is more than 2 hours a day outside of work hours. So you do have your work hours, you can focus on your computer or your device in the work hours, but anything outside from that work hours, if you exceeded more than 2 hours, then that could be too much. That's according to this article, right? Another one, we also have this. Okay, this is from Henry Ford Health. Okay, from an article that says screen time limits aren't just for kids. It says here that according to Dr. Mogadam, he said that most experts agree that adults should limit screen time to less than 2 hours per day outside of work-related activities. Again, it's more or less correlated to the first article, right? This one, more than 2 hours a day, is too much. This one also, it says here that it should be limited to less than 2 hours. So again, ranging from or around 2 hours outside of work-related activities. Okay. We also have this one from Ohio State University, and they have this article by those authors. I think you can see them on the screen, and then their article is entitled "How Less Screen Time Benefits Your Eyes," right? So it says here that there's a part of that article. It says, "What's a healthy amount of screen time?" And then the author said that we don't think there's a known answer for that. So people need to have a strategy to avoid using their phones and laptops so that it's not an all day and into the night habit. So for them, there's actually no like definitive answer, like an actual number that you will impose for a recommended screen time. That's for them. And this one is also from the Harvard School of Public Health. It says here that they actually did not impose like a recommended screen time, but what they said is there's a correlation between screen time, more screen time, and obesity. So the more screen time you have, the more chances of you being obese. That's from their article, right? So again, what's the recommended screen time for adults? Um, there's no magic number actually of hours for recommended screen time for adults, right? However, what's clear is that too much screen time can be detrimental to your health. Okay? So according to you, Dr. Yu, so prolonged screen time, especially this one, especially when it replaces essential activities. Like for example, your screen time replaces your sleep. It replaces your time doing schoolwork. It replaces your time doing social interactions. It could be detrimental on you, right? So if the screen time replaces essential activities, then that could have negative impact on your health, right? So what are these negative effects of too much screen time? So again, there's no definite in terms of like an actual number of hours so that we can say that this is too much. But if that screen time replaces essential activities, then that could be too much, right? So negative effects of too much screen time. We all know this, poor sleep or insomnia, right? Why? Because when we use phones, we all know that phones emits blue lights, right? And then basically the blue light, it tricks your brain that it's still daytime. So the body won't release. We have this hormone in our body called melatonin, right? So probably someone could explain better in terms of what the hormones and chemicals in the body is. But we all know that we have this melatonin and it helps us sleep, right? So if you're using a screen, it actually tricks your brain that it's still daytime. So your brain might delay the release of melatonin that might help you or that might delay your that it will make you harder to fall asleep because of the delayed production of melatonin, right? So we all know that we have this thing called circadian rhythm, and circadian rhythm relies on light. So if you keep on seeing light, then your brain might trick you that it's still daytime and your body might not be able to sleep, which would lead you to poor sleep, right? So that's one of the effects. The second one is, of course, eye strain. So, according to research, normally a person blinks at around 15 to 20 times in a minute, right? That's in a normal situation. But if you're looking at the screen, we blink at around, or our blinking significantly drops to around 5 to 7 times per minute. So, less blinking, meaning less. Uh, our eyes will be dry and then it would be irritated because blinking actually moisturizes our eyes, and then if you blink less, of course it would make your eyes dry and it would irritate your eye. And then when you have an eye irritation, since eye is connected directly to your brain, then probably you will get a headache, right? So not just poor sleep, also eye strain and headaches. Then also addictive behaviors. So social media platforms, if you'll notice, by default, it's on autoplay. So if you have videos, for an instance, looking at videos in social media, it's autoplay, right? While you're scrolling, videos actually played automatically, right? So, and it's designed for infinite scrolling. Have you noticed if you go to your Facebook, I'll just take Facebook for example. You can actually scroll to the very bottom, and then if you think that's not enough, you can always scroll for more. So it's designed for infinite scrolling. It's designed, those videos in autoplay is actually designed for that. You know why? It's because they want you to be engaged on the contents that you are watching. And with scrolling, actually, they said that with scrolling, the feel of scrolling is almost always the same with the feel, the feelings of like getting a notification or getting a message or winning something or winning in a game. It triggers something in your body. Your body might produce dopamine, right? So dopamine is it's a chemical in your body that is related to pleasure or related to addictions, right? So when you think, so when you're having pleasure in a certain activity, then there's a high chance that you will do that again. Because again, for you, that's pleasurable, right? So then it could lead to an addictive behavior, right? So that's addictive behavior. That's an effect of too much screen time. Then, of course, here comes neck, shoulder, physical pains, neck, shoulder, and back pains. So, of course, time spent sitting at desk, for an instance, typing, or probably holding a phone, looking down, it places a strain on your neck, your shoulders, and your back. So, too much screen time, then there's too much of that strain that probably that could lead to pains on those areas like the neck, the shoulders, and your back. Also, there's a study that says it also changes your cognition, right? So, a 2020 study found that people who have been diagnosed with smartphone addiction, these are based on that particular study, right? They have problems with a part of their brain responsible for performance. So, as a result, slower thinking, difficulty processing information, and weaker problem-solving abilities. So again, that's what the study says. So there's a changes in cognition if you're spending too much time on screen. And also, of course, reduced physical activity levels because you're looking at your phones, it could eventually lead to reduced physical activity levels, right? So instead of you walking around or probably doing physical workouts in the gym, it's because you're just looking there on your phone, sitting down. Then it eventually could lead to a sedentary life. And, we all know that sedentary life is basically could lead to several diseases, like for example, hypertension, obesity, diabetes, right? So those are some of the effects or negative effects of too much screen time. So what are the ways that we adults can work to lower our average screen time? So we all know that okay, there are negative effects. So what are the ways? What are the things that we can do so that we could lower our average screen time? I don't know if you've heard the term fabbing, right? It says here that we have to stop fabbing. What is fabbing? Fabbing is a term derived from two common words, phone and snubbing. So phone, snubbing, fabbing, right? So it says here that focusing on your device when you have the chance to talk face to face with someone, you have to stop that. For example, you're on the table with your friends, but instead of talking to your friends, checking on them, well, most of the times, if not all of the times, we're just there holding our phones, just getting on using our phones instead of talking face to face. So stop that. So be fully present in conversations. If you really want to hold your phone, keep your phone face down or out of reach during meals and meetings. And you can also set no phone zones. Like, for example, in your house, right? On your dining table, this is a no phone zone. Or any other areas where you can set that area as a no phone zone. So that's one way. Another one is turn off unneeded notifications. So this one, we have a lot of notifications in our phones coming from social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Google. We also have these shopping apps, Shopee, from Lazada, from all the other e-commerce platforms. You can turn off those notifications, right? So you keep only essential notifications, like for example, message or calls. Or you can even use do not disturb mode during work hours. So what's with notification is that the more you are notified, the more you are triggered to look at the notification. And it's if it's coming from Shopee, then probably the more you are enticed to check on something and probably add to cart and ship out na dayon, right? So if you can, turn off unneeded notification. And then you have to set time limits for all devices. Okay. So it's not just you can watch, you can have your screen time 24/7. You always have to set time limits for all devices. So like you can set your application if there's an app time limit, or you can also download that in a Play Store and App Store. You can even use a physical timer to control your TV, for an instance. Um, Gaming, if you have gaming rig, or reading on e-readers. So you can always set time limits for all those devices. And then one suggestion is that you can also schedule an offline activities like reading, workouts, or hobbies. You can create hobbies, right? So if you're using a screen, and then if you think that you're using that screen too much, then you can set time limit for that particular device. May it be a physical uh, timer, you can have a timer, or you can also have the ones that can be downloaded from that particular device. And then this one, you established, it's more or less like similar to the previous one. Establish a curfew for devices. Like for example, not using your devices 2 hours before bedtime, or at least 30 minutes, right? That could significantly drop your average screen time. So again, one of the suggestions is that you can stop using screens for at least 1 to 2 hours before sleep. Or if you really need to use your phone prior to sleeping, you can always use night mode or blue light filters. Okay? Or you can also replace nighttime scrolling if you're just consuming content, social media content. What you can do is you can replace that scrolling with reading or journaling, right? So that's one of the suggestions. And this one, don't eat while using a device. So you try to practice. I know this is really common for us. We are using a device because we're trying to entertain ourselves while eating. But we forgot that we overindulge with the food na day, no? And also with our kids, we try to let them watch something during eating time so that they will eat faster. No, there are times like those you want them to watch something, right? So it's not good, right? So eat at a dining table without using screens. So if it's eating time, it should be eating time, right? Use meals as a time to connect with family or coworkers. And then focus on mindful eating. Mindful eating meaning you have to savor each bite. So that's it. When you're eating, don't eat while using a device. And then this is second to the last one. You skip screens in the bedroom. So I think this has been repeated from the previous ones. Again, if you can charge your phone outside the bedroom. You can read a physical and actual or a book that you can hold in your hands instead of using an e-reader. And if you can keep TVs and other screens outside of your bedroom. And then the last one is this recommended from Stanford Lifestyle Medicine, right? So no screen time for the first hour of the day. Okay, so when you wake up, your mind is still transitioning from sleep mode to being fully alert, right? So when you instantly engage with a screen that could probably overwhelm your brain with too much information, making it harder to focus for the rest of the day. So even social media and news apps can bombard you with negative headlines, emails, or social media updates, basically making you overwhelmed or anxious right from the start of the day. So those are some of the effects if you use screen time immediately after waking up. So as a way to lower average screen time, as a way to counter that, do not use any screen for the first hour of your day. Okay? So I think that's it. That's the last suggestion in terms of lowering down our screen time. And my challenge for our participants this afternoon is this. You ask yourselves, are my digital habits putting me at risk of those negative effects? What's one thing I can change today to improve my cyber hygiene? So, as we end this session, you reflect on the question, what's one thing? Just make it simple. Just one thing that you can change today to improve your cyber hygiene. Okay? So, that's it for me. And thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you, Sir Jade, for that very comprehensive best sharing of best practices for cyber hygiene. So now let's proceed to the Q&A. Okay, you may use the Zoom chat box or you can raise hand icon and then unmute yourself. Okay, do you have question, Ma'am Maria? Okay.
My question is about using the virus, using the MacBook, MacBooks or the Apple, and then the other, what do you call it, Microsoft something like the Acer, the Dell, and the other laptops. What I notice is that, and I always feel guilty about this when I use a USB, get information or files from an Apple laptop, and then take that USB to another laptop, and it crashes the other laptop. And so I call the Apple, laptops as the virus carrier. And I always, I don't advise my previous students to use their USBs to get files from any MacBooks or Apple products and take it to the the Android laptops because surely it somehow crashes the other laptop.
Sige. Sige, thank you
That's my
so much, ma'am, for
observation.
yeah, thank you
Mhm.
for that question. So, so we have to understand that our devices, let's just say laptops, right? So we have three main operating systems. We have the most common one, which is the Windows OS. Those are being used by
Mm.
Asus and other devices. You also have this Mac OS from the Apple company, and then the Linux or the Linux OS. So if you're saying, ma'am, that you have this Mac OS, right? And then you think it's the Mac OS supposedly is carrying a virus that's infecting Windows OS. So probably there's
Mhm.
a virus in that PC that won't affect a Mac OS. So that particular
Mhm.
virus doesn't actually, it has no bearing, it has no effect to a Mac OS device, but that virus could affect Windows device. So
Mm.
it doesn't mean that the virus should infect the host, because the host this time is a Mac OS, and it can't be affected by that virus because that virus is created only for Windows
Ah,
OS. So it's possible that it's there, it's dormant in that device because it won't affect that device. But when you have a USB, you insert it on your Mac OS, the virus could transfer to the USB. And if you plug that USB to a Windows OS, that's when the virus will be activated.
mm,
So there's a
okay.
high chance
Yeah.
it's a virus created for Windows OS that is now laying dormant in your Mac OS device.
Mm. Because like I have an Apple laptop
Mhm,
that I use personally, and then I have a work laptop, and this was in my previous when I was immersed in the community, and it killed. Like it really killed the other laptop. Like everything's useless because you cannot access the files. It has this,
mhm,
this shortcut arrow.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So again, virus are OS specific, right? So when you create a
Oh,
virus, when a hacker or some ill-intentioned people creates a virus, it's OS based. So a virus made for Windows OS won't affect Mac OS. A virus made for Mac OS won't affect Windows OS and back and forth. So if you have a Windows virus laying dormant in your MacBook, if you have, it won't affect your MacBook because then again it's a Mac OS system, right? But if
mm,
you have a flash drive, you insert it in your Mac OS, it could transfer to the flash drive. And when you transfer that flash
yeah.
drive or when you plug the flash drive to a Windows device, then it could infect that Windows
Kills.
device.
Okay, thank you.
Sige, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Mom Maria. So at this time, we have two questions from Dr. Teresa. I will read the first question. Okay, so first question, can all computers be attacked by malware?
Uh, Yeah, to answer it with yes or no, yes, ma'am. Computers again, it can be from a Windows OS, Mac OS, or Linux. They can all be attacked by a computer virus. But we can rank them into something like the most vulnerable up to the least one, right? So the most, in terms of OS, the most vulnerable Windows for viruses is Windows OS. So if you have devices running on Windows OS, then that's the most vulnerable one. And then you have Mac OS, and then you have Linux. So to answer that, it's a yes.
Okay, thank you, Sir Jade. And the other is here. How can we report or stop Facebook scams that is affecting us and others?
Yeah, for Facebook, we have this report option. So the thing that we can do, the least that we can do is report. If that's a particular account, you can report the account. And then if there's multiple reports to a certain account, then Facebook actually will take action. They might check on the account, and if it's against the community rules, because Facebook set up community rules. If against the rules, then they could uh, remove the account. There's been many instances where uh, known personalities, their Facebook accounts are banned or permanently deleted because of these reports. So if you suspect that a certain account is doing illegal activities, is sort of like doing scams or scamming activities, then you can report that, ma'am, to Facebook. There's a report option in Facebook.
Okay, thank you, Sir Jade. Can I clarify this question, Dr. Teresa? What if MacBook has
Yeah,
Windows?
okay. So, sige. So, MacBook has Windows. So, when you have a MacBook, you also have an option to run. This is like ano lang, a virtual Windows. So, really what's running on your system is Mac OS, right? So if you have a Mac OS and if you want to have a virtual simulation of a Windows so that if you have like a Windows file, you can it can also run in there. Then you can have that Windows. But what's really running in the background is your Mac OS. So think of it as like that. It's the entirety is Mac OS, and then just part of it, because you're just running a simulation of Windows, is the Windows OS. So that's it. And then in terms of, again, like for example, we have the question from Ma Minerva, uh, if the virus could infect that, it won't affect that because the OS running on that device is Mac OS and it's not Windows OS. The Windows is just a simulation.
Okay, thank you, Sir Jade. So, can I have one last question before I will reveal the evaluation form link? You can unmute yourself by just using the raise hand icon if you have something to clarify, or you can use the Zoom chat box. Okay, I think there's none. So for this part, so I will reveal to you the evaluation link.
At this juncture, we kindly invite you to evaluate today's session. Your valuable feedback will help us enhance our programs and services. Additionally, the evaluation will assist us in issuing your certificate of attendance, which will be sent within 2 weeks. Please ensure that you provide the correct email address. You can access the evaluation form by scanning the QR code or by clicking the link in the chat box. Thank you in advance for your time and input.
Okay, I will just copy the link and then I will paste this one in the Zoom chat box. Okay, I hope you are able now to see the evaluation link in the Zoom chat box. So you can get your certificate of attendance once you complete that evaluation link. So at this time, we will have a photo opportunity.
At this time, we would like to invite everyone to join us for a photo opportunity to capture this special moment. If your connectivity allows, kindly switch on your video. Please hold your smile as we take screenshots based on the number of frames displayed on the screen. Get ready, everyone.
Okay, so I think we have one frame. So may I request all the attendees for this session kindly turn on your camera if your connectivity allows. So at this part, we are 25 participants. Okay, so I will give you the signal in which you will give your best smile. So how about the rest? Okay. So now let's start the photo opportunity. Okay, we're still waiting for the other to turn on their camera. Okay, so I will give 5 seconds to turn on the camera of the others. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so now let's start the photo opportunity. So we have one frame, so just give your best smile. And 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, thank you very much. So just give me a minute. I will just copy this picture. So at this time, we will have a sort of announcement for the upcoming free computer education of the ICIO. So for the ICIO, so you can check on our Facebook page. So here I will just copy the link uh, to the Zoom chat box. Okay. And I hope you are able to see the contact information of the ICIO. So we have our Facebook page, and then our Facebook page is SU Lao ICI Lab, and then you can visit the oursoul.su.edu.ph. That is the GSC portal. So I will just give you the overview of this one. I hope you are able to see this particular page. Okay, so this is our Facebook page. So all of the events for the free computer education will be posted in the SU Lao ICI laboratory. And then the next part is you can go to the GSC portal by just viewing that in the Zoom chat box. So it's oursoul.su.edu.ph/GSC portal. So in which we have 4 departments. So we have the SEPA, or the Continuing Education for Professional Advancement. So wherein you can filter it out based on the semester and the school year. So for example, second semester of that particular school year, and then all you need to do is click proceed to see the offerings for that particular department. And you can go back, then you can close this one, and then we have our another unit. We have the SOUL, or stands for Silliman Online University Learning. So we have offerings the same as SEPA. So you can filter it out by semester and school year. And of course, we have the ICIO. So you can filter. We have here second semester of this particular school year, and you can click proceed to see the offerings. Again, this is free certification programs wherein you can get certificate of attendance or certificate of participation. So from this one, I will just uh, give you the program for next Saturday. So here our program for the next Saturday is the second free computer education. This time, this is based open to all parents and guardians. So the title is What Parents Should Know About AI. So again, this is via Zoom. Okay, you can register it. So I will just copy the link. So don't worry, because we will post this in our Facebook page and of course in the GSC portal for your registration. So I will just copy these particular details for the next free computer education for parents. So I will post this, or I will encode this in the Zoom chat box. So that will be our next upscaling, or the free computer education for next week. So thank you very much for joining this particular session. So next part is the closing remarks.
As we wrap up today's vibrant session, we want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of you for joining us, courtesy of the dynamic Dr. Mariano C. Lau Innovation, Creation and Invention Laboratory. We hope you found today's insights and strategies incredibly valuable, and that you're inspired to apply them enthusiastically in your professional and personal endeavors.
Welcome to the Dr. Mariano C. Lau Lab. Here we thrive on continuous learning and innovation. Your participation today truly brings that energy to life.
A huge shout out to our amazing speaker for the lively and insightful presentation. Your expertise has been incredibly valued.
Hey everyone! Our Saturday seminars are the highlight of the week, and we're thrilled to have you join us. Stay tuned for exciting updates on upcoming topics and speakers.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Have an amazing day ahead, and keep innovating and learning.